Have you ever kept a journal? And did anyone ever read it without your permission?
My parents forgot my birthday, but they did not forget to gather everyone together in the living room of my brother's brand new condo and smile for pictures as they handed him the keys. That single moment shattered whatever scraps of hope I had left that maybe, one day, they would see me as more than the reliable daughter who never asked for anything, who always carried her own weight, and who quietly covered the gaps they pretended were invisible. I had walked through life for years pretending that being overlooked was a small price to pay for keeping peace in the family. Yet when I opened my phone that night and saw the flood of posts and smiling faces surrounding him, I realized my silence had bought me nothing but humiliation. There was no forgotten text sitting unsent in their drafts, no last-minute call with a weak excuse. It was not a slip of memory, it was a deliberate erasure of me in favor of him. And for the first time in my life, I decided that I would not swallow it down. I would not push it aside, and I would not continue being the invisible backbone they depended on. I remember sitting there with my phone in my hand, staring at my brother's stupid grin as he waved those shiny keys like he had worked a lifetime for them, and all I could think was, why am I even here in this family? Why am I always the one expected to show up, to pitch in, to keep everything functioning, when they don't even care enough to acknowledge the day I was born? My friends had texted me, my coworkers remembered, even a neighbor dropped off a little cupcake with a candle in it, and yet the people who raised me, the people who had no problem asking me for help when the bills piled up, could not even manage a single word. And then, layered on top of that silence, came the photo of the condo, the caption about how proud they were of their son's new chapter, and I felt my chest tighten with something beyond sadness. It was anger mixed with a sharp sting of knowing that I had been a fool to expect anything different. This was not the first time favoritism had slapped me across the face, but it was the loudest. In the past, I had shrugged when they bailed him out after he totaled his car, even though I was still making payments on my used one. I had pretended it did not sting when they wrote him checks for emergencies that were really just nights out gone too far. I had told myself it was not worth the fight when they covered his tuition, but left me to pick up extra shifts just to afford textbooks. But birthdays, those are the one day when you are supposed to be celebrated simply for existing, the one day when the bare minimum is recognition, and they could not even give me that. They did not forget birthdays, not really, because they plastered his all over social media every single year with cakes and banners and speeches about how proud they were. What they forgot, or rather chose to forget, was mine. As the night went on, my phone buzzed with more photos, more congratulations for him, more reminders that my parents had chosen once again to pour their love and money into their golden child while leaving me in the shadows. I thought about the countless little ways I had stepped in for them, paying their insurance when they claimed they were short that month, covering the electric bill so the lights would not be shut off, picking up groceries on my way over because times were tight, even quietly adding money toward their mortgage when the bank started calling. All of those sacrifices had been made without complaint because I thought it was family, and family meant helping. But family, I realized, is not supposed to mean being invisible. That night, for the first time, instead of feeling sad, I felt cold. I started making mental notes, listing out every single thing I had been doing for them, every payment I had been carrying without recognition, every sacrifice they never acknowledged. It hit me that if they were comfortable forgetting me on my birthday while parading their son's condo like a trophy, then they were comfortable living without me. And maybe it was time to test what that would actually look like. I did not say anything right away. I did not text them, I did not comment on the photos, and I did not confront anyone. I just sat back, letting the weight of years of imbalance settle into place, and I understood that something inside me had shifted permanently. The girl who kept quiet, who accepted the crumbs, who convinced herself that patience would eventually earn respect, was gone. I could feel the anger crystallizing into something sharper, something that was going to cut right through the illusion we had been living in. The truth is, they did not forget my birthday. They erased it. And in erasing it, they erased whatever loyalty I had left to give. That was the moment I decided I was done playing the fool. People like to say that families balance themselves out over time, that every kid gets their moment and every parent eventually figures out where they were unfair. but when I look back at the long list of small humiliations that got brushed off as normal, I can track a straight line from little favors to outright dependence, starting with car insurance that mysteriously landed on my card for just 1 month, then turning into the phone plan because bulk rates make sense and somehow expanding to the electric bill because the auto pay kept failing, all the way to those friendly transfer requests for groceries that were framed as temporary until Friday, and quietly became the default for more Fridays than I can count. I learned early that my brother, who everyone calls Evan like he is the prize at the fair, could turn any mistake into a family emergency that required gentle handling and generous funding, and while my parents, Linda and Frank, told themselves they were just helping him get on his feet, I was told that being independent was a compliment, that being the kid who never needed anything was a badge of honor, so I nodded and said I was fine and figured out the math in the dark while they wrote checks to him in the light. When I got into school, they said loans build character and connections matter more than grades, which was their way of saying they were paying tuition for the child who needed the chance, while I would do just fine at the state school with a schedule that worked around my job. Later, when his first apartment swallowed deposits and late fees, they called it a lesson in adulting and sent help with a smile, and when my rent went up and I took on a longer commute because the place near work was out of reach, they told me I was smart with money and they were proud, which sounded like love, but felt like a pat on the head for disappearing gracefully. I kept the peace because the cost of speaking up always seemed higher than the cost of letting it go, and I told myself that picking up their insurance for a season was no big deal, adding their car to my roadside plan was practical, covering the gas card during a rough patch was kind, and putting my card on the utility portal was efficient. But the lie inside every one of those choices was that it would be temporary, when in reality the second my card worked, the problem was considered solved. And the conversation was over. The pattern hardened in 100 small ways that looked harmless from the outside, like my mother asking if I could order the new streaming bundle because my account already had the discount, or my father texting that his prescription had a copay he could not swing until next week, or Evan calling from a moving truck because his deposit had increased by a ridiculous amount and he just needed a little bridge to make it work. And each time I told myself that families do this for each other, and I swallowed my irritation the way you swallow medicine that always tastes bad, but promises to keep everyone stable. What I never said out loud was that my help did not come out of thin air. It came out of my weekends, my early mornings, my careful planning, and all the quiet no's I said to myself so I could be the living, breathing cushion underneath their mess. Which would have felt noble if anyone had ever acknowledged it, but instead it became a running joke that I was the reliable one who loves a spreadsheet, as if the reason I could fix things was that I liked the admin work rather than the simple fact that I was funding the solution. Even when I tried to set boundaries, the pushback arrived wrapped in concern, like my mother saying she did not want me to stress about money and then asking if I could float the water bill 1 more month because the bank keeps making mistakes, or my father insisting that he hates asking me for anything right before forwarding a screenshot of a red past due notice, as if the color itself was a moral emergency, and when I looked at those messages after the Condo parade, I saw them clearly for the first time, not as cries for help but as habits I had trained them to maintain. I started listing the accounts to see what would actually happen if I stepped out of the picture, and the results were not flattering because the auto pay I set up for their home insurance, the extra money I sent regularly toward the mortgage principal to keep the bank calm, the cell lines that I consolidated to save them from outrageous fees, and the groceries that magically appeared whenever they mentioned being low were not favors. They were structural supports, which meant that my silence had built an entire hidden floor under their lives, and they had been throwing parties directly above it without glancing down. So I did something small and private, which may sound petty to someone who has never had to teach their own family what it feels like when the human safety net stops pretending to be woven out of air, because I opened the streaming bundle I had been covering for years. The one they bragged about to friends because it had every channel under the sun, and I removed my card, clicked the cancel button, watched the renewal date flip to a hard stop, and shut my laptop with a calm I did not recognize. knowing that it was just a single domino and it was supposed to be gentle, yet understanding that the sound it made in my head was louder than anything any of them had heard from me in years. I told no one and I said nothing, because the point was not to make a speech or pick a fight. It was to prove to myself that I could change the rules without permission, and as I sat there watching my phone stay quiet, I realized a truly dangerous truth, which was that if a tiny cancellation could make me feel this steady, then the next move would not be tiny, and the next after that would not be merciful, and they would learn the difference between forgetting my birthday and forgetting who keeps the lights on, because one is rude and the other is a collapse waiting to happen, and I had just started the count. The morning after I canceled the easy stuff, when the silence from my parents felt less like peace and more like a blank screen waiting for the first alert to pop, I made coffee, opened my laptop, and treated the whole situation the way I treat any mess at work that people keep pretending will solve itself, which is to make a list, confirm facts, and then start removing my name and my money from anything that did not belong to me. Because if they could forget my birthday while remembering to celebrate a condo key, then they could also remember how to take responsibility for their own lives without leaning on the daughter they like to call independent whenever a bill needs paying. I started with the phone plan because it was the most visible symbol of how casually they assumed I would carry their convenience, and I went through the tedious process of porting my own number to a separate plan, locked down the account with a new passcode, and removed every additional line that had been riding on my discount, knowing they would get a very clear message when the renewal date hit and their phones asked for a card that was not mine. Then I moved straight to the utilities portal, where I had been the quiet hero for years, clicked through electricity, water, and internet, deleted my payment methods, and turned off auto pay, making sure to screenshot the confirmations because I have learned that when people depend on you without acknowledging it, they also like to rewrite history the moment their comfort gets interrupted. From there I called the insurance carrier and sat through the music that always sounds like a bad joke, explained that I was removing my card as the payer on my parents' home policy, and asked to be taken off any automatic renewals, then switched to the car insurance where my name had been listed as a secondary on a policy I did not drive and did not control, and I made sure that liability followed the people behind the wheel rather than the person behind the wallet, which might sound cold if you have not spent years carrying risks you never signed up for, but felt like basic self-respect to me. I moved on to the gas card that started as a quick favor during a rough patch and somehow turned into their default, and I closed the account entirely, even though I knew the next fill-up would deliver a surprise that would be blamed on me instead of the long habit of assuming everything would be smoothed over. I opened my bank app and looked at the transfer history that read like a diary nobody else had to keep, months of little lifelines labeled with friendly notes, and I set up a hard rule in my head that there would be no more bridges, no more until Friday. No more can you just for now. Then I canceled the monthly contribution I had been making toward their mortgage principal, a quiet extra that kept the lender cordial and the letters friendly, and I did it with the same calm you get when you finally tell yourself the truth out loud, which is that giving endlessly to people who cannot even manage a text on your birthday is not generosity, it is collusion with your own disappearance. Because I know how they operate, I prepared for the accusations the way a person prepares for a storm they can see on the radar, and I pulled every receipt into a folder, forwarded the confirmations to a backup email, changed passwords on accounts where I had once been the emergency contact, and even added two-factor authentication to anything that held my card information, not because I thought my parents would do something extreme, but because I had spent enough time being the responsible one to understand that responsibility includes protecting yourself from the people who use your care as cover for their denial. For a minute I felt the old tug of guilt, the voice that says family is family and you do not pull rugs out from under people you love, yet right behind it came the sharper voice that had woken up the night of the condo photos. The one that reminded me I had not pulled any rugs. I had rolled up the mat I bought, cleaned, and replaced every time they stepped on it with muddy shoes, and I kept hearing the same sentence in my head, steady and maddeningly simple, which was that adults who can host a housewarming for their golden boy can surely manage to log into a utility portal and put a card on file. I did not text, I did not warn, I did not offer a timeline or a grace period, because warnings in this family turn into negotiations that end with me paying anyway, and I wanted the reality to land without my usual cushioning. So I closed the laptop, put my phone face down, and went about my day, telling myself that the world would not end just because I stopped pretending to be its Axel, and that if anyone really needed me, they know how to speak to me with respect rather than with assumptions. Dressed up as emergencies. Late that night, when the billing cycles rolled over and the automated systems did what automated systems do, my phone lit up like a small-town parade. First, a message from my mother asking if the internet was down because her shows would not load. Then a call from my father saying the power company had sent an alarming email and asking whether I changed something by mistake, and finally a string of messages from Evan that started smug and ended confused when his phone suggested adding a payment method. I let them pile up without touching a single one, and as midnight tipped into morning, I checked one last setting on the mortgage account to make sure the next draft would not pull from me. Then I set the phone to silent. Because the real conversation had not even started yet, and the first call I planned to answer would not be theirs. By the next afternoon, the tone of the messages had shifted from confused to accusatory to pleading in the space of a few hours, with my mother leading the chorus of "How could you?" and "We are your parents," and "This must be a mistake," while also insisting that if I had any concerns we should have talked like adults. Which was hilarious in a bleak way because talking like adults had always meant I listened, I paid, and I thanked them for letting me fix a mess they had created, so I let the calls ring out and read every text twice, not to torture myself, but to confirm how quickly entitlement morphs into emergency once the automatic yes is gone. When I finally answered, I did it once and only once, because I wanted their first real conversation with the grown version of me to be focused, steady, and impossible to twist, so I said that nothing was a mistake. That my money had gone back into my life where it belonged, that every account I had been propping up had been returned to its rightful owners, and that if they needed help learning how to log in and add a card then I would send instructions, but that I would not, under any circumstances, be sending another cent or making another phone call on their behalf, which landed like a slap because my mother immediately pivoted to the script she keeps for moments when her comfort is threatened, telling me that family is supposed to be a team and that I was punishing them for something that should not matter, like a birthday, and I told her, with a calm I have never felt before, that this had nothing to do with cake and everything to do with the clear choice they made when they celebrated my brother's condo while erasing me completely. My father tried the practical angle he always uses when guilt fails, talking about late fees and how companies are unforgiving and how he thought I understood the stress of keeping a house running. And I said I understood it perfectly because I had been keeping 2 houses running for years, mine and theirs, without the salary or the title or the thanks, and that the stress he was describing could be solved by doing exactly what I had done that morning, which was to call, wait on hold, and provide a card that belongs to the person receiving the service, and there was a long silence on the line that felt less like thinking and more like a door closing on a room they never wanted to enter. Evan jumped in next with the same swagger he always carries when he believes the audience is friendly, telling me I was being dramatic and that if I had a problem with him getting the condo I should have said something instead of sabotaging our parents. And I told him his condo was not my problem because keys come with responsibilities, and that I was thrilled for him to finally experience what it feels like to be the name on the bill, which did not land the way I expected because he laughed and said that it was not his job to bankroll our parents, and in that moment the air cleared for me in a way that conversations never had before, because I realized that I was not even arguing with people who disagreed with me. I was arguing with people who had never considered me at all. I hung up without drama and did the pettiest and most rational thing I have ever done, which was to assemble a clean, simple transition packet that would have saved them from humiliation if pride had not been louder than gratitude. A single email with subject line, "Here is what you need now that I am not your bank," containing step-by-step instructions for re-adding payment methods to the utilities, the phone carrier, the insurance portal, and the mortgage site, along with a clear sentence for each service stating that future calls should go directly to them and not to me, Then I attached a spreadsheet that listed 2 years of my contributions with dates, amounts, and purposes in plain language, not to demand repayment, but to erase any fantasy that what I had done was a handful of favors rather than a second job without a paycheck. Because I am finished hiding the truth to protect people who do not protect me, I did not just send that email to my parents and my brother and hope for maturity. I also copied the family group thread that for years had been a highlight reel for Evan's rescues and wins while my contributions were treated like air, and I added a single line at the top that said, kindly and without heat, that beginning today I would no longer be available as the default solution and that questions should go to the people responsible for the accounts they use, and then I pressed send and closed my laptop and sat still while my phone began to buzz like a kicked beehive. The first replies were predictable, with aunts calling me brave in private messages while publicly pretending nothing had happened, cousins asking if everything was okay, and my mother writing that I had humiliated them and ruined family unity over nothing. To which I responded with the same sentence I had already used, that adults who can host a celebration for a condo can manage to log into a utility portal, and that I was not punishing anyone, I was declining a role I never agreed to play. Which did not change her tone but did change mine, because once you say the truth out loud, you cannot unsay it even if you wanted to. That night, when they called again with a new approach that sounded rehearsed and full of soft words about fresh starts and understanding and just until things stabilize, I told them I would consider a path forward only after a real apology that recognized the years of imbalance and a written agreement that set clear boundaries and repayment for the last month's bills I had already covered. And I heard the outrage spike immediately because apologies suggest responsibility and responsibility suggests change, and my mother said I was acting like a stranger while my father tried to barter down the terms to something that sounded like me paying again soon. I ended the call before the loop started, opened a payment app, and sent Evan a single request labeled, "Your share of family costs I have been carrying," with an amount that was modest compared to the ledger yet impossible to ignore, and I knew as I watched the status sit on pending that he would call in a rage, that he would accuse me of making a scene, that he would blame me for the fallout, which made what I did next even easier. Because if they want the team they keep talking about, the team now has a captain who actually reads the rules. I changed the contact numbers on every account I had ever managed so that the first call would ring to the Golden Boy's shiny new phone instead of mine. Added his email as the primary correspondence address on the services where I was still listed as the emergency contact, and then I turned my ringer to silent and put the phone face down, not because I am cruel, but because tomorrow morning I am going to make one last move that they will never see coming, and when it lands, they will stop begging and start listening. I woke up before my alarm with that clear, steady feeling that shows up when you have already made the hard decision, and all that remains is to carry it out without flinching, so I brewed coffee. Opened the folder I had built out of dates and receipts and screenshots that could survive any denial, and I drafted 2 simple documents that held more power than any lecture I could deliver. The first a short, plain letter addressed to my parents that laid out the boundary in unambiguous terms with the sentence that beginning today I would not provide money, logins, phone calls, or emergency triage of any kind, followed by a line that any request for help would be redirected to the person whose name appears on the bill, and the second a concise, itemized demand to Evan for reimbursement of the most recent month of costs I had carried that can be directly tied to his phone line, his share of the family plan perks he bragged about, and the overflow groceries charged during his visits that had been framed as family dinners while landing on my statement, with a note stating that failure to resolve would result in a small claims filing because I was done negotiating my own worth. I printed the letters, walked to the mailbox for the kind of certified delivery that makes people read every word, and then I did the move that ended the guessing games. Because I filed the small claim online with the quiet efficiency I had always used to rescue everyone else, attached the ledger entries that applied to him specifically, uploaded the screenshots showing his acknowledgement of those benefits, and set service to the brand new condo address he had splashed all over social media. Not because I wanted a courtroom victory or a spectacle, but because consequences have a way of creating instant clarity in families that treat your labor like a suggestion until a judge's calendar appears in the thread. By late afternoon, my phone was lighting up with the panicked choreography I had predicted, my mother insisting I had gone too far and that family does not drag family into legal rooms. My father switching to the practical plea about fees and records and embarrassment, and Evan calling me ruthless, while also asking if I could just withdraw the filing so we could talk like siblings. And I let them all say everything they needed to say before I answered with one message that read like an instruction sheet, which told them that there were two paths and only two, the first being a written apology that recognized the years of imbalance without excuses, plus full repayment of the most recent month's charges I listed to make the point felt and not only heard, plus a signed boundary agreement stating that I would never again be added to any bill without my prior consent in writing, after which I would file a voluntary dismissal and mute the group for a while so everyone could practice living within the new rules, and the second path being that we could let the filing stand and meet on a date to be assigned where a neutral stranger would read the ledger they had ignored for years. And I would be fine either way because the whole point was that I was done carrying the cost of their comfort. They argued, they cried, they stalled, and then, because life has a way of shoving the truth to the surface when money and pride collide, they chose the first path, not gracefully but clearly. Sending a message that included an apology written in the plain language I had asked for without the usual detours into how hard parenting is or how stressful life has been, followed by a transfer in the exact amount I had listed with a note that said it was not an admission of anything but a gesture of good faith, which I accepted without commentary because the victory was not the dollars, it was the shift from entitlement to acknowledgement, and then my father asked where to sign. So I sent the boundary document through an e-signature link and watched the names appear like a new habit learning to stand. Evan sent his own apology later that night, not warm and not eloquent, but real enough to keep, in which he said he did not see me because I made everything look easy and because people clap for keys while ignoring the person who has been paying for light. And I told him that I would not be his fallback or their back door ever again, that I wished him luck with the condo and the bills and the life he picked, and that if he wanted a sister, he should learn to show up without asking for a card. First, after which I uploaded the voluntary dismissal to the court portal, archived the entire thread, and turned my phone off for the first quiet evening I had allowed myself in longer than I care to admit. The fallout moved quickly once the roles were corrected, because when the next billing cycles rolled around, the calls went to the right phones and the notifications pinged the right inboxes, and I did not receive a single screenshot with a panicked caption, which told me that they had in fact always been capable of adult behavior. They just liked the version where I did it for them better, and that realization landed without bitterness, because I was too busy learning the rhythm of a life where my paycheck belonged to me, my time returned to me, and my birthday would never again be measured against someone else's celebration, since it had already taught me the only lesson I needed. I cannot tell you that everything is tidy or that resentment vanished or that anyone learned a grand moral, because families are complicated and people are stubborn and apologies do not rewrite history. But I can tell you that the final move worked exactly the way I needed it to, which is that when they tried to pull me back into the role of quiet rescuer, I gave them a choice backed by structure instead of guilt, watched them pick the road that kept them out of a courtroom, and closed the door on the old script without slamming it. And if that sounds cold, then maybe it is, but it is also the cleanest justice I have ever designed, the kind that makes you breathe deeper without asking permission. And when I blew out a candle by myself a week later, I did not make a wish. I just said out loud that the last bill I would ever pay for them was the cost of finally learning to say no and mean it, and in that moment I knew, without a doubt and without a tremor, that I had won.